Hello everyone. Welcome to another Peaceful Solution Character Education Certification course. Everyone in the auditorium can be seated. Welcome all of those that are still coming in. Welcome all of you that are watching online all across, pretty much all across the world. I know many people watching and tuning in, and it's always exciting to get feedback from everyone. So if you're watching, if you have questions, if you just want to give feedback, you're more than welcome to do so. We're always interested. We realize the Peaceful Solution is the context that's in the Peaceful Solution, and the application of it is pretty much universal. It can be applied anywhere, but many different countries have many different problems. The United States may be of one stature, other countries could have another. And I know when you go and you look and you discuss things with people all around the world, some people have problems that you would never consider here in the United States, but they have them there. And of course we have problems here that other countries wouldn't have. But everyone, if you could, I hope everyone has the respect unit. You need to have your teachers unit, your respect teachers unit. And of course that's the fourth of the junior high series. We've already covered the character, the acceptance, the self-control, and we're going to be using a lot of the character unit tonight, going back to show how we were building and how we're still building. And we'll even get into the acceptance and the self-control unit by next class, showing how all of those things we covered and the information that was brought out, how we need that as we're moving forward. Because we're going to briefly cover some things, but we've already went into deep detail in the other books, and that's where we need to be able to pull back off of that. And if you've been able to go through all of these books with your students, then you can pull that information with them too. See how much they've retained of what they've covered, and see how much they can actually put these pieces of the puzzle together. Putting it together in textbook form can be a challenge, but the greatest challenge is putting it together in our lives. That's the greatest challenge of all. The Peaceful Solution is one of the most, if not the most, wonderful tool to put into someone's life, but it only works if you choose to use it, as the author would say. If you don't choose to use it, it'll never work. So turning over to LP, that's lesson plan 4, page D. David was in procedure 6, and of course we're still in procedure 6. We're going to try to finish up procedure 6 tonight and get into procedures 7 and 8. And you'll see this is one of the more trickier parts of the procedures, where lesson plans kind of leave out pages, doesn't really tell you when to do a page, tells you how to have a discussion, and then when you get to procedure 9, page 101 and 102, you got to have it covered by then. So you got to figure out how to work all of that in, because there's really no instructions telling you when to implement it, but of course your discussion will help you tie those things together. But here, looking at procedure 6 once again, because we're going to be doing a little bit of review and then picking back up from where David left off. Once again, tell students that in addition to crime, racism is another way in which disrespect manifests itself within our society. And tonight we're going to remember the key word, society, because that encompasses everyone. You can have a society within a school system, you can have a society within a workplace, you can have a society within a city, whether it's big or small, and then you have your state, and of course your country, and then you have your continents. And all of these things, as David likes to talk about it, being synergistic. And they synergistically work together, or they're interdependent. Everyone depends on another. Each person depends on another. And one of the greatest examples we got to see that with was whenever COVID hit and supply chains locked down, and people started realizing how much other countries contribute to our leisure of life here in the United States. And when I say our leisure of life, we do have it very leisure. You can think that, oh, you don't know how hard I work. You don't know what I do without. I can promise you I can point out places that have it a lot harder than you. And I just talked to a group of people the other day in Africa. The average salary is $1 a day. And they're making it. They're barely making it. Now, of course, $1 is like 485 naira. But it's not like $485. Now imagine raising a family if you and your wife are working on $2 a day. Well, you do without a lot of things. and you only eat certain things. It's kind of like the first time I went to Latin America or South America, and I said, why do you guys enjoy rice and beans so much? You know, because everything was rice and beans, rice and beans, rice and beans. And an older lady looked at me, she goes, it's not that we like it, it's all we can afford. And that really stuck in my mind. You know, they found ways to make these beans and rice in so many different ways and make so many different flavorings, whether they're spicy or, you know, whatever it is, they did it because they're a victim of circumstance and what they were doing. They just wanted a different taste. So they've done different things, whether it be putting chilies or whatever in these things. But think about this, and I would encourage you to never forget, the United States is one of the easiest countries in the world to live in. No matter how hard you think you got it here, it's one of the easiest countries in the world to live in. And I told a prisoner that one time. He goes, that's easy for you to say. I said, you haven't seen anything unless you see a prison in Russia. Trust me, you got it easy even in prison here. You got TVs to watch, and you have fans blowing, and there's certain things you can do for education. Not that way. You know, different countries have different things. But continuing on here, it says racism incorporates many forms of disrespect. And of course, David covered a lot of things about racism, and we'll just briefly cover it again tonight. But he did a great job of explaining about how color of skin, culture, all of these things people can draw opinions of. They can look at somebody and think, that person's a terrorist. You know, like if you're in an airport, and here goes somebody walking by, you know, that's dressed like they're from the Middle East, and they have a bag beside of them. Everybody starts looking suspicious if they were to leave the bag. But let everybody else leave a bag, and they just forgot it. But let that person leave a bag, and it has to be a bomb. That's the only thing it can be. You know, and these things have been taught to us. You weren't born thinking that way. They've been taught to us to think that way. That people are out to blow you up or out to do you harm. You know, that if someone, and I don't care what color skin it is, you know, it's sad that people are, if you're out at 12 o'clock at night and you're leaving your job, if you see a white person walk down the road, you feel like, it's okay. But if you see someone that has a different color of skin, you're like, I better hurry up and get in my car and lock the doors. That is stupidity that is taught to people. That is where racism is at its worst. When you judge someone to be either positive or negative because of the color of their skin, that is the stupidity of mankind at its best. And I was raised in the Deep South, and I came from a state where I seen racism, and I learned from a young age that that is one of the highest degrees of stupidity you can be involved in. And I can't say that strong enough. And I don't know how someone can be offended by understanding that it's complete stupidity, it's ignorance, it's idiotic to judge someone or to determine the value of a person by the color of their skin or by their nationality. That is a failure of society. And remember that word, society. When society fails, we teach people to do things. And then we're going to see some things tonight that where society fails, and you can destroy the mind of a lot of people. It says, have students turn to page 97 through 99 and read the section entitled Racism. Students are to then complete the exercise, understand the main point found on page 100, and discuss their answers. So we're going to go ahead and turn to page 98. That's where David finished up at. And then we're going to get into page 99. But looking over to page 98, you see here that big block in the center of the page. Discrimination is based on prejudice and stereotypes. And once again, we have to remember these things are taught. A person is not born racist. I had someone try to convince me one time that, no, people are born racist. I said, then what do you do when a child's father is black and the mother is white? How racist is the child when it's born? That's kind of confusing, isn't it? Or if the child is, the father's Asian and the mother's American, you know, or vice versa, or if you have an American that marries a Middle Eastern, you know, you start seeing these things, and no, they're not born that way. There are some things that we do inherit But, and I'll quote the author, stupidity has to be taught. You know, and even if you don't understand something, that's just a lack of knowledge. But to bring hate, to do things that are negative, and to say that they're beneficial, that's stupidity. And, you know, I hope no one takes that offensive, but I hope everyone understands that there's no place in society for it, and that's one thing that needs to be removed from society. And until it is, we're going to still suffer as a society. When Asians are getting pushed off the railway, subways are getting hit in New York City, you know, or Russians are being talked about in a negative way, or Koreans, whether North Korean or South Korean. Just imagine, if you live on the Korean Peninsula, you're a great guy if you're from the South, and if you're from the North, you got to be wanting to nuke somebody. But you're automatically looked at that way. You know, that you'd think society would say, well, why? Why has this come to pass? Why are people thinking this way? You know, how many of us sitting here today listening to this class know that the United States went in and killed the majority of men in the Korean War? They literally wiped out over 60% of the men in North Korea in the Korean War. And you wonder why people don't like the United States. Well, if someone came in and killed a lot of us, or heaven forbid they run planes into buildings, then look how fast that we start doing things. We start bombing countries that had nothing to do with it. Now that's what we have to realize, that there's a breakdown there. That's not a peaceful solution. It doesn't resolve anything. But once again here it says, many people in our society have lost their lives because of racism. You know, I think one of the greatest stories that has come up, and it's up again because one of the ladies involved recently died last week, was Emmett Till, and how that young man was brutalized and beat and mutilated, and his mother wanted to make sure that his coffin was open so everyone could see how that young boy, because he was black and was accused of whistling at a white woman, they mutilated that boy. And they were deemed to be acceptable at the time. Only years later did they go back and, you know, well, they probably shouldn't have done that, but, you know, it's been so long, nothing we can do now. You know, you're right. After they killed the young man, you're right. You can't, you know, he's dead. He's already been mutilated. You know, putting somebody into prison for it doesn't help. You have to educate people on how this should never take place again. And it hasn't taken place again. We see that. You know, we see it with Rodney King. We've seen it even as recent as just a few years ago, where these things are still taking place. And that's what makes the news. There's still a lot that doesn't make the news. But notice here it says, unless people begin to value life, that means deem it to be important. They look at all life as being important. Many more people will die. Racism has, notice, robbed millions of their right to life. Yes, it's robbed. It's stolen. It's taken from them. Someone's life is taken from them. Well, how do you rob life? Well, let's finish this out and we'll discuss it here briefly. Robbed millions of their right to life because it usually results in violence. Now, keep in mind that violence and aggression are the worst forms of disrespect. Violence sends a loud, clear message that someone's life and well-being are worthless. You know, one of the most horrific things I've ever seen, and it's going to be pretty graphic to describe. I was going to show a video, but I figured that the words enough would be enough in itself. But there was a torture that was developed to do on other humans. And what they would do was they would take a device to where it would actually be like taking a human and putting them into a blender. And they would literally just blend the child, yes, child, all to pieces. Or they would put it in a vacuum and it would suck it in different parts. It's one of the most violent ways a person can die. It literally rips the body in half, in many different pieces. But we call it abortion, so it sounds so much safer. And then we sell the parts after we've done that. And I say we because society is doing it. Now, we talk about, and we're going to talk about the Holocaust and what they did with incinerating human beings and how horrible that was. Most society agrees on that. Now, there's some that say it didn't exist. But think about how many people you can get behind ethnic cleansing should not have taken place. Now, they always want to get behind it after it's done. No one wanted to get behind it when it was going on. But we still have one of the most horrific ways of taking human life and deeming that life to be worthless, and we call that abortion. It's not racism to abort. I don't know if you've ever looked up how many people abort babies because their fathers won't approve of the color of the skin of the person they were with, but it's very high. Or they just abort because they don't know who the father is. Or because the father just don't want to be there. Or because the mother wasn't interested in having the baby. You know, is it racism? It's hate. It's pure hate. The Holocaust that took place during World War II is a permanent part of our history and serves as a vivid reminder of the devastating consequences of racism in a society. Now, this was because of racist ideologies. Jewish people and other ethnic groups who lived in Germany and other European countries between the years of 1933 and 1945, they were severely discriminated against. With the use of unfair laws and propaganda, which in the systematic spreading of false information through newspapers, radio, and word of mouth, pretty much like it's done today, millions of people had all of their basic human rights stolen from them. Yes, once again, these were stolen. They were taken by force. They were lied about, as David talked about in his last class. They'll make a mention and they'll spread, hey, did you see what those people are doing over there? Doesn't even have to be true. And I'm not trying to get political, but one of the most popular people that was accused of doing something, put on trial and hanged for it, was Saddam Hussein. Just for them to later come out, and Secretary of State Colin Powell was probably the most outspoken, and he was the one that literally was kind of the pusher behind it at first. He came out and said it wasn't true. They didn't stop him from hanging him. They still hung him. They came up with a different reason to hang him. So if you got a goal and the first reason don't work, just make up another one, right? Well, someone asked me one time, do you think that they didn't have a reason? If someone lies to you about the first one, it's hard to believe the second one, honestly. Trust has to be earned. And if you're telling me that a person had weapons of mass destruction, you go and annihilate the country, kill his sons, and put him on trial and hang him, and then you say, he didn't have anything. We thought he did. Oops. Well, how do you restore all the life? And how many people actually died when those attacks took place? I mean, they just destroyed Baghdad. And it was there on the news for everyone to see. You could actually watch it. I remember watching it at work when they went in and they started bombing and destroying that place. And it was more of a, could it have possibly been because someone made an accusation that they were going to kill someone's father? All because someone invaded their country then. Well, with the use of these unfair laws and propaganda, which is the systematic spreading of false information through newspapers, radio, and word of mouth, millions of people have lost all of their basic rights have been stolen from them. So they've had all of their basic rights stolen from them. Stolen, taken. Did not deserve to be done. They did not do anything wrong. Someone took something without permission. Through violence in the form of beatings and burnings, an estimated 6 million men, women, and children of Jewish descent and approximately 3 million others were murdered. That's stealing someone's life. When you murder someone, you've stole their life because of their religious and culture beliefs and because they were mentally or physically challenged. Now think about that. If someone has a physical defect or a mental defect, if we started eliminating everybody that had a mental defect, I'm not for sure I'd be sitting here teaching class tonight. I'm pretty sure that all of us have some sort of a mental defect in today's society. And when I say mental defect, I don't mean that you have to be on some kind of medication, but the way that mental illness is defined in this time period, I pretty much think we all fall victim to mental illness one way or another, because I don't care what you do, What crime you commit, claiming mental insanity seems to be the number one cause. And it's really lack of education or the teaching, the educating of hate. But, physical and mental, think about that. People used to be put to death, discarded, because they just didn't fit the pedigree. Now, the question becomes, why are those children being born that way? Someone just told me before class, and I've read this in the news before, and the author of the Peaceful Solution spoke about this many, many times. And it was talking about how STDs in children are up 35% now. And the main one is syphilis. And for all of you that have never studied what syphilis does to a child, you need to research it. It attacks the neurological points of a child, and it gets into the brain, and it will make a brain look like Swiss cheese. A child is born suffering from the choices of the parents, and it doesn't even get out into the world, and it's already suffering one of the worst diseases that a person can get. Now, when the child comes out, oh, look at this defect it has, so let's get rid of it. Well, who caused the defect? What caused the defect? Well, the parents did it. Well, we should look at them. Well, who taught them? Or who didn't teach them? Was it the Hollywood movies that show everybody sleeping with everybody and never really gets into the diseases that are taking place? Was it the advertisements that you see to go to this nightclub, go to that nightclub, join this strip club? Was it that making it sound like this is what everybody should be doing that led to it? We never really address the cause of a problem, but everybody always wants to look at the end result, the product that is created, and everyone wants to look at that and say that doesn't fit into society. Well, what didn't fit into society was the pervert, or the person that actually did not contain themselves, or the person that did not educate someone. This kills. These things are real. Back in the 80s, they had a huge HIV scare. But one thing, I grew up in the 80s. There was an HIV scare, and I was in the 7th grade when a lot of this come out, so it scared all of us. But one thing I learned from watching documentaries, the people that were doing the things that brought forth HIV, they didn't care. They just, do it till I get it, and then I guess we'll figure it out once I get it. It didn't change them. It didn't change them at all. But there's a new drug now, so. But one thing it doesn't change, you can get, they'll get you 10 or 20 more years of life, but in the end, you still die. And I know everybody goes, well, you're going to die of something, might as well die of this. If you've ever seen someone at the very end of HIV, if you've ever seen someone at the end of cancer, or where their heart has malfunctioned and going down, if you've ever dealt with someone like that, you're not going to want it. If you've ever dealt with someone at the end of their life with cancer, and there was a family member of my wife that her dad had a brother that was dying of cancer, and he went to pick him up in the bed, and he was pretty much at the end of it. And when he picked him up, his hand felt moist, and when he pulled his hand, all the skin just came off his back. They had to put big bandages that were tape his back because it was falling apart. The skin he was crumbling. Now imagine what a person goes through when they're dying like that. And we think, well, you got to get it someday. Well, what causes it? Why is it coming forth? There was just in the news, and this is something the author of the Peaceful Solution brought up many times before, but it's breaking news now. Sexually transmitted diseases, the main cause of mouth and throat cancer. It's not rocket science. It's not rocket science at all. If you stick your hand in boiling water, it's going to burn and get hurt. If you mess with something outside of the rules of morality, you're going to create a poison, a toxicity. It's going to take place. That's all there is to it. If you open up a bottle of bleach and stick your nose in it and try to inhale, you're going to have difficulty breathing. If you go to the gas station and decide to get a quick swig out of the gas pump because you're thirsty, it's not going to work very well. The body's not meant to take that in. And that's what's bringing these other things. And what does that have to do with racism? Whenever these things get into the brain, into the mind, scientific study shows they affect the mind, and that's what is leading to what we call mental illness, a breakdown. Scientists refer to it as confusion, to where a person can't process everyday thoughts. They really don't know how to put this and this together to make it whole. Well, a lack of education, or a lack of education in the wrong thing, has led to these things. Who in their right mind would kill 6 million Jews because they decide to keep a day that they call the Shabbat, the seventh day, because they chose not to eat pork, because they chose to do something a little differently, that, well, we need to wipe out that whole race? You know, think about that. Was that really the reason? Well, what was in that person's brain that made them think that we need to get rid of those people? And then you research history, and that's not the only time people were killed that chose to live a certain way. There was a lot of people killed for doing similar to the same thing. Looking over to page 99, you have the cold hard facts, and it says the chart below shows the estimated number of Jews who were mistreated, abused, and eventually lost their lives due to false ideology, or that's a fancy word for stupidity, false ideology of anti-Semitism, and that swept over the European continent. You know, and you see here, Poland suffered the absolute worst, with an estimated dead of 2.9 million. And then you see the Soviet Union was second, Romania, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, France, and of course on down the list. And of course you get into Norway and Denmark, but you see 5,721,100 people died, all because of false ideology, because they chose to live their life according to what they deemed fit, and they felt that this is how they were supposed to live. Now, their life that they were living was not hurting anybody. It didn't hurt anybody that they chose to keep what they called the Shabbat. It didn't hurt that they chose not to eat certain things, that they had a different diet. That didn't hurt anyone. So what was the real reason for killing these people? Looking on, it says, many other events in history exemplify the devastating consequences of disrespecting others based on racism. People have been enslaved, brutally treated, wars have been fought, and many innocent lives lost. You know, that hasn't stopped. It's still taking place to this day. Research the following events to learn more about the effects of racism in our society. Now, notice it says research, so I have some things for your class. You know, if we put up the first slide, it's just a picture. That was one of the pictures that you can get off the internet. All of these people were actually sent off to be put in a concentration camp. And the reason I use that picture, because all of those people were burned to death. They were incinerated after they were gassed. They gassed them, then incinerated them. You know, those people didn't know they were going to die, but they were sure treated like, well, worse than dogs. I don't know what you would define them as, but human life was not valued in that situation. And you look at these people, you see older people, younger people. So it's not that they were too young. It's not that they were too old. You know, it's not because they were, a different color of skin. They're all white. So why was the real reason for destroying these people? And the next slide that comes up, now remember, you can say racism, but this was not because of color of skin. This was caused by ethnicity. The next one, you have the American slave trade, the Jim Crow laws, and the Albanian ethnic cleansing. Now you see there in the very top left-hand corner, that's an illustration. It's hard to get pictures of what the real slavery looked like, because usually the slaves are mutilated, or they're being demoralized by, they don't even allow them to dress completely. They were treated as worse than trash. And this was back in the 1850s, 1860s of the United States. And they were looked at as property. They were bought and sold. You see a child being held there, auctioned off, and the mother trying to grab the child. When they brought them over, when they would auction these families off, they separated them. And they looked at them like you look at cattle at the market for sale. And, well, I want a strong one. I want this. Well, I don't want no woman with it. I don't need no children with it. You can send them off the other way. And there were stories where people were told, nah, you got to buy the whole family. So the slave owner would buy the family and kill the ones he didn't want. He would discard them like they were trash. It was like, well, I got to buy 3 to get the one I want, so I'll buy this one, but I'm not feeding them. So they would take them and they would kill them. Imagine what that would be like. We see these stories and we think, oh, how sad. Imagine if that was you. And that's what we need to do, and that's what empathy is put ourselves in someone else's shoes. We can say, but, that was Abraham Lincoln fixed all that. Really? Have you watched the news lately to see how many people are being slaughtered? Have you seen what's going on in Sudan, in southern Sudan? Have you seen what's taking place? Another proxy war between 2 countries that are in Sudan and southern Sudan right now because they're a very oil-rich nation that has never tapped into their supply. What are the reasons behind this? And, there's a short video, and I'm only going to play a little bit of it. But this was very popular back when I was in high school. I just entered high school, and a lot of you young men probably won't know who this is, and the video is kind of choppy because this was back before we had really decent technology. It was in 1988, and I want to tell you a story before I show you the video, because words can be extremely hurtful, but some people wouldn't have a clue. When I was growing up, I had a cousin named Tom, and when my children, when they were born, we lived in the same city for years, probably about 20 years. So we worked together. We were part of the Peaceful Solution together. We were in quite a few events and you could say clubs together. And, and of course life changes and people have to do different jobs and they move away and, and life takes people different directions. But in this time when my children were growing up, they always called him Uncle Tom. And he was the uncle, and his name was Tom, so they called him Uncle Tom. But back in 1988, it was a popular show called Geraldo Rivera, to where there was racism, there was the KKK or the Aryan Brotherhood or whatever they want to call themselves, and then you had a black man, a colored man, an African American, whatever you want to deem to be proper to say. I've spoke to people all around the world, and whatever country you're in, they want something different. Most people just want to be called a human being, whether they're white, black, yellow, green, purple. They just want to be called human. And we've already covered that before. But we're going to play a short video. I'm going to stop it because there's enough violence, but I want you to see how quickly hatred and violence can escalate because of words that are reinterpreted to insult others. To the next slide. If you can put up the next slide. Yeah. These words, they hurt people, and I know, I think William showed a picture that was similar to this in a class that he was teaching here not long ago. And words are like punching someone, they hurt. They're abusive. We tend to think that, well, I didn't hit anybody. And if you notice, calling someone an Uncle Tom, from what this man has come from in his background, there's another word that when I was growing up, it started with an N, that we, as children growing up, if we would have said that, I don't think we would have been able to say another word. We would have, back then you would have got popped in the mouth. Today we call that child abuse. But if that word would have come out of my mouth, that would have not went too well. But I want to tell you a situation where we were down in Laredo, Texas one time teaching. And Catan was with us. And this is just another way of how people can very innocently say things and they just don't know. And there were some young boys came out of the class, and Laredo is pretty much a mainly Hispanic town. And there's some, white people, very few African Americans in Laredo, Texas. And these two boys came out, and they couldn't even speak English. They were from across the border, and they were going to school in the United States. And they sing Catan in the hallway. And they were like, "Look, y negro hombre." And I'm like, "What did you call him?" And to them, because we were like, You don't say stuff like that. But in Spanish, that means, look, a black man. It doesn't mean the Nigger that we're used to here in the United States, which is pretty much calling someone a piece of trash. To him, that's how you say it in Spanish. And he didn't mean any insults, but he wanted to shake his hand. I mean, he was like just amazed. He had never seen somebody like that before. You know, and you think, no, they see that down in Mexico. I go to Mexico. No, not really. With refugees, you do. It's kind of like if I go to Nigeria, Kenya, where I have a lot of friends, I'm going to stick out like a sore thumb. Not very common over there. But once again, sometimes when you hear people say things, a lot of it is the ideology behind what is said. And sometimes you can have children or young people or different cultures say things. They're not meaning to be insulting in any which way, shape, or form. That's the only way they know to say it. Now, if you train your child to refer to, and I'll just say it because it's derogatory. If you tell your child to refer to people that are African American by the N-word, the stupidity, and you're teaching your child stupidity. If you refer to Hispanics as wetbacks, that's stupidity, and you're teaching your child stupidity. If you refer to your, white people as crackers, that's stupidity, and you're teaching your child stupidity. And most people don't even know what that means. I remember being called that one time, and I looked straight at them. I said, no, my family didn't own any slaves, because a cracker was a slave owner that cracked the whip. I'm sorry, but I'm more Cherokee Indian, not the slave owner. Sorry, that's not me. But people tend to say that because that's what fits what they want to say. And you can say so many derogatory comments for so many ethnic groups. If there's one available, there's a word to demoralize them. And sadly, those words hurt. Now here on the bottom of page 99, it says racism is a dangerous ideology for any society because it incorporates, notice, all forms of disrespect. Not just a form, it incorporates all forms of disrespect. Derogatory remarks and racist jokes verbally abuse others. Violent and aggressive action directed at the individual or the property are physically abusive. So if you direct it at the person or the property, notice they're physically abusive. Now, I want you to think about when we're dropping bombs on people because of their religion or their ideology. I want you to think about countries right now that say the LGBTQ propaganda are teaching children that you don't know what your gender is, how they're being attacked because they say you're not teaching that here. We will teach our children that boys are boys and girls are girls. That used to be the ideology all across the world. That's only recently changed in the last 20 years to where now they're teaching you don't really know what you are until you're 18 or so. Used to be, they kind of told the mother when your child was born, hey, you have a boy or you have a girl. And I seen a video the other day where the doctor gives the child the mother. She goes, what did I have? He goes, it'll tell you when it's 18. And sadly, that's actually being taught in society today. Now, think about the confusion and the, I don't want to say anything else because it's irritating to have something that is so simplistic and for somebody to step in and confuse it because of ideologies that they want that have recently just been created or regurgitated. Someone consumed them down, and when the vomit came back out, this is what it looked like this time. If we can go to the next slide, remind your students on page 38, this is of the character unit, we talked about emotional and verbal abuse. And that's what we're talking about here with racism. And notice we said here on page 38, even though physical pain is not inflicted, emotional and verbal abuse are just as damaging. Years ago, the National Committee for Prevention of Child Abuse made the public aware of this form of abuse by displaying posters that read, words hit as hard as a fist. Words such as, you're stupid, you can't do anything right, and I wish you were never born cause rejection, fear, and resentment. Now, it says every year over 18,000 children in the United States alone are physically abused, and many more are emotionally and sexually abused. And notice you have the mother there saying, you're so stupid you can't do anything right. Well, the stupidity, identifying something as stupidity, lack of education, if you want to call a child stupid, who taught it the stupidity? If a parent looks at a child and says, you're stupid, that falls on the parent. You're basically telling your child, you don't know what you're doing. Well, who was supposed to teach the child what they were doing? So the next time, if you're a parent, or if you know someone, and you hear someone say, they call their child stupid, go, oh, wait a minute. You need to say that again, but let me get you a pocket mirror real quick. Okay, look in the mirror. Okay, now say it again. There you go. Now you're getting closer to the truth. Not that I would encourage anybody to do that. You probably start a brawl like we just seen here on the TV, but that's really closer to the truth. When a parent who's 30, 40 years old looks at a child that's 10 and 12 and thinks that child, you should know everything I do. The child probably knows more, because it's seen what mom or dad did and thinks, I don't want a life like that. I don't want anything like that. So let's go back here to our procedures. We're on page 100, but we also need to read some of the procedures that go along with this. When you look here at the bottom of page, or LP, Lesson Plan 4, page E, and of course, page 100 is found in the bottom of Procedure 6, but I want to read Procedure 7 along with this just to get it in our mind as teachers. And it's not that you're addressing the student, but we're working in a direction that we're going to have to incorporate some pages in, so we kind of need to know what the lesson plan says as we incorporate these pages in. So you notice here it says that understanding the main point found on page 100, that's part of Procedure 6, but look at Procedure 7. It says, explain to students that there are many types of influences that can play a role in their choices to be respectful. Ask students to predict what some of those influences are. Notice answers will vary, but should include, friends, role models, sports heroes, singers, movie stars, the television, and movies. And of course, that right there will explain why there's syphilis spreading throughout most of the children being born today. Stress that everything we experience through our sense has the potential to affect the choices we make. Tell students that one of the most powerful influences in our modern society is the television. So keep that in mind. Let's go back over to page 100, and then we're going to get into page 101. So here on page 100, it says, understanding the main point. And this is a question you're going to pose to your classroom. And notice that word society again. How does disrespect in the form of verbal and physical abuse affect members of society? Now, a lot of people will say, sticks and stones can break my bones, but words will never hurt me. That's one of the biggest lies you can teach someone. People, students, children commit suicide every day because they're picked on, they're bullied, and they're talked about. And not just children, adults do this. This takes place in the workplace also. People are bullied and they take their own lives because of they're told they're worthless, or they're made to feel worthless due to the color of their skin. Probably their eyes aren't the right color, too far apart, too close together, nose isn't the right size, ears not set right on the head. There's a reason, a dime a dozen, why people want to pick on someone else to make themselves feel better. And if you got to pick on someone else to make yourself feel better, then that's a sign that you need some serious help yourself. But, get feedback. You notice it says answers will vary, but might include verbal abuse that values the worth of a person. It can lead to resentment, anger, retaliation, or physical abuse. Physical abuse leads to fear, hate, and retaliation. Two forms of abuse are behind much of the fear, anger, and violence that exists within society. You talk about this disrespect that's verbally abusive and then physically abusive, and you can see it on a global scale. And I was watching a program the other day, and it was interesting how Russia and the United States abuse each other verbally. And the United States came out and they showed the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, saying, Russia should not be in Ukraine. It's not part of Russia. The USSR no longer exists. Russia has no right to be messing around in Ukraine. They have no right to any of the Baltic states. When the USSR dissolved, that was it. They have no right to take anything from anybody. And I thought, well, okay, that makes sense. And then Russia come out and said, we encourage Mexico to rise up because the United States had no right to take any land from Mexico, so they need to give back Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California. Because they took 55% of the land and they didn't pay them for it. They took it by force. They actually told them they would pay them for it, and then they sent them the bill for the war that they had and said, here, it is considered paid in full. And if they come across that river, they're trespassing, but yet whose land really was it? And if you steal something from someone, who does it belong to? If I steal your bike, does it belong to me? Did the rights of ownership change because I stole it? Now, I watched very quickly to see if the Secretary of State of the United States was going to reply, and he tabled the comment, so to speak. In other words, there's too many facts to that. Let's get on to something else. So he just started talking about North Korea. And it was kind of hilarious because it was like, if the rule works for Ukraine, it kind of works for Mexico too, don't you think? And if I tell you what, if people that live in the United States don't think Mexico has intentions of taking back their land, then you've never talked to political leaders in Mexico. We learned that in Laredo, Texas, when we talked to dignitaries there. They have every intention of taking back parts of their land, because they're stolen. It's been stolen from them. And you can't blame someone that had something stolen from them for wanting it back. Looking here to the second question that you'll pose to your classroom, it says, what are some of the consequences of disrespect in society? Notice the answers could vary. They could be fear, hatred, death. Death is the ultimate result of failure. When a group of people is singled out and mistreated because of nationality or culture, then all society is affected. A society where people are not free to reach their full potential, they're limited, is a society that will not achieve unity and peace. And we have what we call third world countries. And I realize I use that term when trying to identify nationalities, but when I go to countries that are called third world, you never say that, because the citizens feel like you're calling them third-class citizens. And Americans they're looked at as very arrogant people, egotistical kind of people, because Americans are spoiled. And if you don't know that, if you're an American, you're spoiled. If you don't know that, you are. You have opportunities that do not exist in other places. We are spoiled. And that's why so many people try to get here, because they want to be spoiled too. They want to be able to get a job, and, they don't know the American dream actually consists of a lot of debt, $31 trillion of debt. They don't know that part. They think everybody, I remember it came out a news report back in the early 90s that people in the Middle East watched a show that I'm not encouraging anyone to watch this show. I don't remember ever watching it, and I'm not encouraging anybody to watch it. But it was a show called Baywatch, and people in the Middle East thought all Americans lived that way. And I thought, man, they wouldn't even want to walk on the beach in the United States if they knew what was on the beach. And they think people live like that here? Not really. If we could go to the next slide. This is something you want to bring back up to your classroom. And of course, this was chapter 5, the ripple effect. Notice I highlighted the word society because we talked a lot about society, and it kind of, it's hard to see there. But I'll read it to you. It's page 105 in your character unit for your notes. And it says our character, notice our character, that's what we believe in these morals, how much we believe about these morals. They dictate our character, these rules that we're talking about. Our character dictates our behavior and our action. It is the foundation by which we interact with others. Well, and that's where respect is put into. Remember, respect is the foundation of all positive communication. There are very few activities that we do on a daily basis which are not directly interacting with someone. Can you recall a day when you did not see or speak to anyone? As human beings, we need to interact and associate with others. It is this need to belong that compels us to have friends and people we can interact with and feel accepted by. And all of us want to feel accepted. All of us want to be able to fit in. And that's where the peer pressure and conformity comes in, to where we start bending our values on these rules when we want to fit in so bad we're willing to do something that's not proper. It is the same need to belong that compels adults to marry, raise families, and allow people to form neighborhoods and communities. When a group of people live under a common body of laws or morals, these common body of rules, and share common values and interests, they're called a society. So that's what truly makes up a society. So when you have an immoral society, as we've said many times, all 4 teachers that teach this class have referred back to this. When you have a society that does away with the rules, it's called an immoral society. Now, you can have a society that creates a bunch more rules, but if they're creating a rule that brings harm to yourself, someone else, or the environment, you can create a rule that's immoral. And what is a rule that's created that's immoral? Well, imagine there are some places that are now saying that there are no longer female or boys and girls restrooms in schools. They're just going to call them unisex, or they call them unibathrooms, because they're going to just let them pick which one they want to go to. How do you think that's going to work for teenagers getting into where chemicals are generating in their body, the things that they're watching on their phones, the things that is made available to them? The internet consists mostly of a certain type of entertainment that destroys the mind, scientifically proven to destroy the mind. How's this going to affect people when I think I'll just go to this bathroom? Or you sit back and you wait for the person you want to see and you follow right in behind them. Think about what that does, the destruction. Think about the lack of respect, the lack of privacy that's supposed to be guaranteed to a person when they go do something that's so simple, a very basic part of life. Well, back to our slide here, it says, in the same way character shapes an individual, it can also shape society. So when we see our society as immoral, that's being determined by the values of the character. And remember if you're not familiar with how the United States operates, other countries operate pretty much in the same way. Congress and Senate, it is their job to create law. That's why most of them are lawyers. It's their job to create law. It's the Supreme Court's job to interpret the law that was created by the Congress and Senate. Now, if you want to know if they're creating laws that are beneficial, just look to see how much they agree upon. They usually don't agree upon anything unless it makes money, or they want to go to war. They usually agree upon that. But watch to see if very simple things. And remember, the starting salary for someone in the Congress is $175,000 a year. And you got that place full of people, $175,000 a year, arguing day in and day out over very simple things that we could probably take some 10-year-olds in there and figure it out. If they just use morals. And everything was based on, does this harm someone else? Does this bring harm to myself? Or does this bring harm to the environment? If those 3 basic concepts were used in creating rules, you would actually need a lot less rules. Because a lot of times rules are created to kind of jump over a rule that was already there. You can't do something? Oh, we'll make a rule that says you can. Well, why did we have the rule that said you can't? It's old, we've advanced as a society. We need to come up with new things, make it lively. Well, we're not doing a great job. We're not doing a great job at all when we take those rules that kept people safe for many years and then we twist it and turn it. The very last paragraph on that slide, it says, we live in a society where our need to belong makes us interdependent upon one another. We need each other. Because we rely on and need each other, our behaviors affect one another in both positive and negative ways. Our ability to affect each other is like a stone dropped into a pond, causing one to ripple out the next, each one larger than the one before. If you've ever done that or seen that, you do that and you see that ripple and it goes out, and of course it just keeps going, but it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, just like the problems get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Well, continuing on here with page 101, we'll get into this page. We won't get through it, but we'll get into it. And remember, we're still operating on Procedure 7 that we went ahead and read and what we're working through here. And it says the question of the day, and we're on the top of page 101. The question of the day. If there are rules guiding and instructing people toward the proper way to treat each other, why do people disrespect each other in society? Well, why would you think? Pose that question to yourself. Pose that question to your class. Now, do you live in a society where someone goes, well, those rules were around for, 4,000 years, but we did away with them? Well, what rules did you do away with? I've seen here in the state of Texas, now, in the Peaceful Solution, we do not teach religion, but I've seen in the state of Texas, and I'm saying this because here they're getting ready to merge church and state. The state of Texas is voting to instill the Ten Commandments back into classrooms. Now, I don't think you need to see, or someone needs to tell you, do not steal. I think we teach that already. You don't have to say you're teaching religion in school to say, do not steal. You can say it's religious, but I think everybody wants to not be stolen from. And you start thinking about these rules, and I'm not talking about the Ten Commandments, but rules in general that are given to us. And different cultures have different rules, and then there's what people call the ultimate set of rules. Well, where did these rules come from? Where did they originate from? And why is society breaking down? If there are rules that actually bring peace, then why did we ignore these rules that bring peace? You kind of got to question that in society, and if someone tells you that, if you break a rule, it's okay. It's okay. Well, how's it okay? Someone got hurt, someone suffered, someone died. How is that okay? Well, it's not okay. Well, notice the answer to this question is both simple and complex. So it can be easily stated, but some things that are easily said are not easily implemented. Why? Because you have a lot of people that have different ideologies. Many factors contribute to how people treat each other and whether or not they regard the rules that govern behavior and interaction. Well, what rules are we talking about? Constitution of the United States that is always constantly trying to be altered. The rules that govern us, whether they're, you think about, you have rules that will govern you, IRS, financial rules. Books like that thick. And I doubt there's any American, basic American, that even knows a 0.5% of what's in that book. And then you can be charged, you can be prosecuted for breaking a rule. Have you ever seen how many laws the United States has governing things? It's about 4 or 5 books about that thick. And you have to get a lawyer, not just any lawyer. You have to get a lawyer that specializes in the crime for the rule that you broke, because not any lawyer will work. Sometimes you're dealing with property, sometimes you're dealing with theft, sometimes you're dealing with embezzlement, sometimes you're being sued for something you said. Well, there's different lawyers. It's like Baskin Robbins. You can go in and get any color or any flavor of ice cream you want, but you're going to pay a lot for it. More than you made last year. It's going to cost you a lot. Well, I've always wondered, why do we not pay people to teach us to keep the rule, but we pay people enormous amounts of money when we break the rule to help get us out of the consequence, or try to get us out? Wouldn't it be much smarter to pay someone to teach us what the rules are so we can avoid breaking the rules? That seems like, as a society, if these rules are supposed to be kept and we're going to prosecute people for them, we would spend more time teaching people how to keep the rules. But that's the lack of society. Notice here, it says in this section, we're going to explore the following 3 factors: what people are taught, the choices they make, and how media affects the choices. And we're going to stop right there, because we're going to pick up right at that point on the next class. But I want you to think about, have a discussion with your students. If you're parents, have a discussion with your children. There's household rules. Go to bed at this time so you can get up at this time. If your child goes to bed at 11 o'clock and has to get up at 5 o'clock, I'm sleepy, I can't do this. Well, you go to bed earlier, you'll get up feeling a lot better. If you don't, it won't work. So our next class is going to be on 5-3 this coming week. It'll be on Wednesday at 5:30, and we look forward to joining back with each and every one of you again. Thank you very much for joining us.